I think the size of that delegation shows the President Aquino is travelling with a large number of both cabinet ministers and a business delegation of 70 people. And I think the size of that delegation shows the how ambitious the President is to grow the relationship between New Zealand in all areas, and New Zealand shares that ambition. So, Mr. President, we thank you for making the trip down here. We have a very warm and friendly relationship with the Philippines, and during our discussions we had an opportunity to reflect on the size of the growing Filipino community here in New Zealand, which is getting significantly larger, the involvement between our two economies, New Zealand increasingly using some of the services sectors that the Philippines does so well in maintaining, and of course New Zealand growing its dairy and agricultural exports to the Philippines. Both countries were signatories, of course, to the ASEAN Australia and New Zealand Free Trade Agreement back in 2010, and we see that as a great opportunity for us to, again, grow the opportunities between the two countries. We talked a little bit about tourism and about the opportunities for both countries. The President was kind enough to show me the new commercial that's been shown around the world to promote the Philippines. Very impressive it was too. It looks like a beautiful country and somewhere I'd like to visit in the future, and we'll be looking to, again, build that capability between our two countries. I personally congratulated the President for the work that he's been doing when it comes to corruption and his efforts to fight corruption. We think it takes a brave and courageous leader to undertake those steps, and the President should be congratulated for the work he's doing there, and also for his commitment to peace and security, and I congratulate him for the work in signing the peace agreement in Mindanao. So they were some of the discussions that we had. Finally, I expressed to the President, as I would to all Filipinos, our great sadness for the loss that they suffered during the Christchurch earthquake, where 11 Filipino citizens were tragically killed in Christchurch. I know that I would personally want to express my great sorrow to their families. Today we are signing a number of agreements, and we'll get the ministers to do that in a moment, but one of them is a working holiday scheme which will enable 100 young people from each country to spend time in each other's country annually, and I'm sure that'll be very popular in the Philippines, as indeed it will be here in New Zealand. The arrangement of geothermal cooperation area where New Zealand sees itself as having significant prowess, and a memorandum of arrangement on defence cooperation. The Philippines is New Zealand's fourth largest dairy export market, and consumption is growing, and we'll be working with the Filipino community, or with the Philippines government, to help establish their own dairy industry, which I know is very small at the moment, but we'll be putting in around about $5 million over 5 years to help in the development and establishment of the dairy industry in the Philippines. President and I get an opportunity to regularly see each other. Next, of course, will be at the East Asian Summit in Cambodia, but we recently saw each other obviously in Vladivostok at APEC. We've had a good opportunity at those times to exchange our thoughts and to grow the friendship between our two countries. So, Mr. President, it was great delight when you accepted our invitation to come, that you are building those long historical links between the Philippines and New Zealand, and I invite you to make some remarks.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, may we express our gratitude to the Prime Minister, the Governor General, the government and people of New Zealand for extending every courtesy and consideration to myself and our delegation. The warmth and hospitality has truly been remarkable, not just now but always, as the 36,640 Filipinos who live here experience every day. This afternoon, the Prime Minister and I had the opportunity to discuss several topics concerning our bilateral relations. We agreed we should increase our bilateral consultations, which will in turn increase trade and tourism activity between our two countries. Both parties are determined to examine other areas of cooperation which can enhance our political and economic relations. We share the good news of the Philippine economy with the Prime Minister. Our GDP expanded by 6.1% in the first semester of this year, which is so far higher than the upper boundary of our estimates. And hopefully our estimates were indeed wrong, that this continues to grow in further. International credit rating agencies have awarded the Philippines successive upgrades, and most recently, Fitch and Standard & Poor's placed the country just one notch away from being considered investment grade. The World Economic Forum was marked as the 65th most competitive nation out of 144 countries in their most recent Global Competitiveness Report, 20 places higher than our position just 2 years ago. Likewise, international publications have hailed the Philippines as one of the best places for investments and thus have named us perhaps Asia's next tiger. All these are dividends of good governance and the return to the basic principle that the Filipino people gave us as a mandate to do nothing more and nothing less than provide authentic public service. The Prime Minister again expressed optimism about continued prospects for our growth and was determined to promote further trade between our nations. By opening up shop in the Philippines, New Zealand businesses can gain further foothold in the ASEAN market, and we look forward to this because we know that their contribution to our regional market not only provides more services and products, it also opens up possibilities for business expansion, which leads to more employment opportunities for both our peoples. We also agreed to intensify collaboration in the areas of defense and security, development, employment, and renewable energy. It is noteworthy that New Zealand, time and again, has expressed its support for initiatives that seek to promote the general welfare of peoples through peaceful avenues. And this support is tangible. For example, through New Zealand Aid, New Zealand already provides development assistance to the people of Maguindanao in our country's Muslim South, supporting the development of agricultural livelihoods for communities in the province. In line with this, I was happy to discuss our newly forged framework agreement with the MILF. On matters of regional and international concern, our nations share the same belief. Disputes should be addressed through a diplomatic and rules-based approach. Mutual respect and cooperation should be the norms that govern relations between nations. This visit highlights the mutual respect and cooperation that is the defining characteristic of our partnership. Later, we will witness signing of agreements to cover defense cooperation and geothermal energy cooperation. Along with this, we shall also sign a working holiday arrangement which will allow both New Zealanders and Filipinos to travel and work for up to 12 months in each other's country. Through this, we envision more cultural and people-to-people exchanges that can only better strengthen the ties between our countries. Indeed, we are laying the foundations for a stronger New Zealand-Philippine relations. The agreement signed here and the issues discussed not only strengthen our regional stance, but more importantly, deepen our understanding and regard for one another as Pacific states. Our end goal is clear: to foster democracy and liberty and to promote the rule of law in our region. By so doing, our national interests and the advancement of interdependence and dialogue become central strategies for securing lasting peace and stability in the Pacific. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And think that this will affect what's going on now, or do you take the relationship further forward, and how does it tie into New Zealand-Washington Declaration in the United States?
I think it would largely codify what our current behaviour is at the moment, but obviously working closely with our partners like the Philippines is something that we find very useful. In terms of the Washington Declaration, again, that for the most part actually put together in writing a continuation of the work that we've been doing, but did allow us for obvious reasons to expand in other areas. So we see this as an important step to, as I say, codify our current behaviour. But we look forward to working, more closely with the Philippines in the years to come.
Mr. President, what do you say the pivot of the United States more into the Pacific and the tensions with China? You have your own disputes.
Well, perhaps we should put it in a proper context. We find ourselves, for instance, in going onto this trip, a review of our relations between the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. And we find ourselves normally on the same side of so many different issues, stretching decades from World War II and beyond. Okay. Now, we are all vibrant democracies, perhaps both in America, New Zealand, and Australia, more solidly in place than has been in our country, which has had challenges in the martial law period and also in the administration right before mine. So we welcome the coming back of America, the strategic shift that they have called. It promotes a more balanced regime within the region, which hopefully will provide greater stability for all parties concerned.
Mr. President, with the working holiday scheme, 100 people doesn't sound like a lot. Is that something that you would expand in the future? And also, what kind of jobs do you see those folks coming here doing?
Well, besides actually, the jobs actually will be related to areas where, for instance, the geothermal field, I'm told, we have to send most of our experts here or students who would want to become experts in the field to New Zealand to get their initial college degrees for it. The idea more is in the scheme of having experienced the different culture and environment that hopefully both sides will be able to imbibe the positive attributes endemic to both our cultures and our peoples. So that I understand is the main concept or the main goal that we have in coming up with this working holiday scheme. And once we get to know each other better, we do discover how similar we are rather than different, which enhances the cooperation we all have to demonstrate in the growing interconnectivity and similarity of problems we are forced to confront. So there are various fields, perhaps a lot more varied in the Philippines than in New Zealand, but we more specialized, more perhaps advanced studies. For instance, again, going back to geothermal, we're second largest in terms of exploiting geothermal resources in the world. And I had to be educated that our geothermal industry actually started with New Zealand expertise, number one. Number two, you're still at the forefront, wherein you can make our existing facilities, our methods that much more efficient, that much more longer lasting. And we seek to, and also other areas like today we witnessed an agreement for salmon farming, more ventures for culture. So you have certain industries, certain areas where you have established expertise that I'm sure we will benefit from, just even expanding our knowledge base, avoiding some mistakes and attempting to replicate the best practices that you're already demonstrating.
And I was surprised to see that this was the first ever working holiday agreement that you've signed, because there are millions and millions of Filipinos working abroad in different countries, often in quite low-paid jobs. But this is something quite different than that, is it?
The end point is to increase the body of knowledge available with the end point of going back home to be able to share this expertise with the rest of our countrymen.
Does the geothermal arrangement a commercial or development assistance? Mr. Key, you might want to answer this. I'm wondering
Yeah.
when the SOEs are privatised, will it have any effect on such arrangements, cooperative arrangements?
It's our sector working with and on opportunities in the Philippines and obviously vice versa. So it's very similar to what we signed in Indonesia. And in terms of the potential change in structure, for instance, to Mighty River Power, no, it doesn't alter their capacity to participate in this kind of arrangement. At the moment, obviously they're 100% government owned. But in the point where they're majority owned by the government but not 100% owned, they'd still participate fully in this. So it's really about, and it's been one of the reasons why we think there are real opportunities around the mixed ownership model, is for these companies to expand opportunities in other markets, which can be quite capital intensive, as we know, in the geothermal area.
Good afternoon, sirs. My question is for both leaders. How relevant is this new cooperation on defense is in view of the territorial disputes in the South China Sea? And as a follow-up to that, how important is peace and stability in South China Sea is for your respective countries?
Well, maybe I can begin by saying, obviously, peace and stability in the South China Sea is critical because Asia is the fastest growing part of the world, and we want to see that growth continue. And anything that disrupts that growth would have implications for the New Zealand economy. So we think peace and stability is extremely important. Secondly, New Zealand doesn't try and take sides on territorial disputes, but we do encourage dialogue and discourse and a way of peacefully finding a solution to these issues. So we recognise the dispute that's currently being undertaken, and we're actively encouraging the partners to try and find a way through that. From the defence point of view, I mean, we see real benefits from that. As I say, it largely puts in writing what is current practice today. But I think, you know, our military forces working together and training together is a very positive and sensible thing to take place.
Well, defense cooperation should not be seen as offensive to anybody, I think. That we started with. Defense is just that. Increases our capabilities to defend ourselves against not necessarily superpower threats, but even terrorist threats and so on. And New Zealand has given us quite a bit of training. Even the security forces, for instance, at the airport, were trained by their special forces at some point in time. So this, again, formalizes that which has already been existing, so we can exchange, again, the experiences, the best practices, improving our own, our respective forces. No? In this, again, in this arena of shared threats, especially in terms of the terrorist threats, drug trafficking, human trafficking, these are all, there is need, no, for exchange of information and abilities, or enhancing each one's abilities. Okay? Now, China is important to the Philippines, obviously, and important to the rest of the world. If Asia is going to be seen as the driver for the recovery of the global economy, now, again, we agree with the statement of the Prime Minister that stability in the region is essential so as not to delay the recovery of the world economy. So a system where peaceful resolution of disputes should be to everybody's interest to foster and to make a reality. And towards that end, we thank countries like New Zealand, amongst others, that have joined in the voice, no, to having a rules-based approach to settling all of these disputes.
Just a follow-up to the President and the Prime Minister. We've recently ratified a status of visiting force agreement with Australia. Do we see down the road such an agreement between New Zealand and the Philippines?
That hasn't been discussed yet.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've been doing things that were not codified, to use the Prime Minister words initially. So, again, we have a shared, in a sense, some very shared critical defining moments in both our nation's histories. So that shouldn't be a tremendous issue if there's a need for us to undertake such an agreement.
I think it summarizes it pretty well.
Yeah, and Mr. Prime Minister, you've acknowledged that somehow there's a lopsided trade agreement arrangement to the Philippines right now. We're the third dairy market in the whole world after China and the U.S. And yet New Zealand is the 42nd trading partner of the Philippines. So, and you mentioned about the $5 billion investment to develop our own dairy industry. Can you expound more on this?
Yeah, so the investment's $5 million over 5 years, and it aims to expand our, to impart knowledge and capability for the Philippines so that you can develop your own dairy industry. As I understand it, 99% of your dairy consumption is imported, so you're a very small domestic producer, but like all countries in Asia that we see who are undergoing significant economic growth and a significant wealth effect, the likely demand for dairy products and for protein in general is rising quite rapidly. So we think that New Zealand can play a role in two parts. One is helping service that demand as it grows, but also secondly in building your local capability and your ability to service your own domestic market. So I'd say that's very important. I think from a wider perspective, I mean, one of the reasons why we're very pleased that the President brought such a large business delegation with him today is, again, it's an opportunity for businesses to look and see what opportunities present themselves here in New Zealand. We like to have balanced trade with countries where we can. I mean, that I think makes sense for both parties. We are seeing some very big New Zealand companies outsourcing activities to the Philippines. Telecom, for instance, its call centre is now, and has been for some time, based in the Philippines. So there are many countries that are looking towards the Philippines, and if we have greater exposure, that will help. And that's one of the advantages we see as something like a working holiday program, which is an opportunity for people each year to come and work in various different businesses. They can only work for 3 months per employer. But again, over time, they build up a capability and knowledge of what takes place in New Zealand. So we see great opportunities for the two countries.
It is New Zealand $5 million or
5 million. 5 million.
And is it for capacity building, the technology
Yes.
transfer?
Yeah.
Not actual investment.
Yeah, capacity building largely, yeah.
Thank you.
That's right.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies. With regards to the recent development in the Mindanao peace process, I understand there is this standing travel advisory, travel warning to your citizens against traveling in the region Mindanao. Do you have plans now to reevaluate, reconsider that travel warning?
Well, those matters are handled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. They give the government the best advice and then update that advice on our website. So I haven't looked at the most recent advice, but I'm sure our officials will take on board the signals that we're getting, to recognise the great work that the President has done in signing the peace accord. And if that is, as is almost certainly going to be the case, seeing a much safer environment, then I'm sure the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will reflect that and change its rating. But we leave it for them to advise New Zealanders.
As a follow-up to that, sir, with this positive development in the region, are you also eyeing to put some investment in that area?
In terms of in Mindanao, or
Yes, sir.
I'm not aware of that, but it's possible as part of the overall investment profile. It's possible.
Thank you.
With the region of travel warning, if the Philippines is wanting to expand tourism and attract tourists, do you think that it does appear to be a safe country to travel in?
I think we're safer than a lot of countries. We will not say that we're the Garden of Eden, that it's perfect. There will always, even the Garden of Eden had a snake, come to think of it.
Yeah.
But it is not as perhaps I can give you, early on into my term in office, we were asking where the fairness would be. We're in a neighboring country, had a bombing incident that killed over 100 individuals. And they get a warning that is less than the warning given to our country, where the comparative event is a warning of a possible bombing event. It was almost on the nature of a raw report that engendered our sterner warning against us than the country that actually experienced a bombing incident that, again, killed over 100 people. So we asked, where is the fairness in that? Why are we being labeled as such? Is it our issue? Is it our fault that we are not able to communicate the situation here best? And is it to the credit of the other country that they are able to manage their public relations that much more? But again, I think the record speaks for itself. We will have our share of crime. We're a population of 95 million. Metro Manila, for instance, has a population of 14 million. And like any other big city, it will have its ills. But I think our security forces have demonstrated time and again their ability to thwart acts of violence, terrorist violence, or if there is an occurrence, to be able to solve it rather than put it in an unsolved category. So are we any safer than other countries? I can point to several countries, but I would be undiplomatic if I were to enumerate them right now. But at the same time, we've even instituted a subdivision within our police forces that caters specifically for tourists, is educated into the needs of tourists, is more sensitized, and actually focused on ensuring that the Filipino hospitality that we're known for does happen and is a reality for every tourist that visits us. And the numbers of tourists have increased from an average of about 3 million when I started to about a target of 4.6 million by this year. So I think the tourists are responding to the campaign and having a vacation that really brought on value. So that's why the numbers are increasing. We have confidence that we'll reach 10 million by 2016. I'm sorry. Yeah.
This is a very large delegation that you're bringing in. So statement of friendship with New Zealand and Australia. Why is this region so important, and what's prompting this renewed friendship?
Well, we had occasion to talk to the Prime Minister of Australia at some point, no? And we highlighted the shared values, shared backgrounds, and again, also for New Zealand, to the same degree, I go back to World War II. Exactly what happened in Bataan and Corregidor, and the time afforded to our allies to be able to set up the necessary defenses to withstand the attack by the Japanese, that eventually became the springboard for our regaining our freedoms. We were together in Korea, we were together in Vietnam, we were together in so many other instances. No? So why is it important at this point in time? The issues, no? You name the issue: global climate change, the economy, etc. We really need to work closer and stronger with each other, and then you will find that the best allies would be those that share the same values with you. Hence, we believe that we should strengthen the relations that exist between those that we have shared the most values with for the longest possible time, and that happens to be amongst the other countries, no? Australia and New Zealand.
Did you discuss disaster relief and cooperation and the RENA grounding?
I'm sorry, the last part of the
The
question.
RENA is ship that no, in relation to the RENA, but you know, I think both countries are aware of the situation that took place there. From time to time, we'll have citizens that, if they break the law, will be held account in the law of, or well, under the law of the land that injustice has occurred, and but it's not. I don't think it was necessary to discuss it on that particular occasion. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.